The story I'm about to share is an eerie account of experiences I've told countless times over my life. I have recounted this story to my family, friends, school faculty, the police, you name it. However, it often gets dismissed, which is tragic considering it involves real people who have been missing for a long time. So it started back in the fall of '86, around Halloween time. I was just a 12-year-old kid living in Thorntown, a small community smack dab in the middle of Indiana. It was an incredibly quiet town, with most residents familiar with one another. There was a lot of space for exploring, which was something I liked to do a lot then. One particular place that my friends and I would often bike or walk around were these abandoned trains and train tracks that went through and left town. There were a lot of creepy stories and rumors about ghostly appearances around these places, which always made them more spooky. Some were very real though, and hard to ignore, especially the ones involving children that had actually gone missing. The town was in hysteria about these cases, and none of them had been solved. One late afternoon, I was hanging out with a close friend and a neighbor named Sarah. A girl my age, I was too shy to tell I had a big crush on. We were sitting on my front doorstep chatting after biking around the neighborhood for a bit. She asked if I had been hearing a train passing through during the late hours of the night. I laughed dismissively, knowing well that the trains had been decommissioned for quite some time, and we were familiar with the urban legends associated with them. Despite this, Sarah's persistent and slightly irked expression indicated that she was not joking, and I soon realized the seriousness of her question. I reassured her I hadn't heard anything, finding it odd since I lived so close to the tracks myself. However, Sarah persisted, sharing her distressing experiences of unsettling visions and a sense of being haunted for the past few nights. Each time, it apparently began with the sound of a train horn. The change in her demeanor over the past few days was evident, her usual vibrant energy replaced by utter sadness. I couldn't shake off the feeling of concern, hoping passionately that whatever was troubling her would soon go away. Nonetheless, it weighed heavily on me to acknowledge that our last interaction would be exactly that, the last, as she, too, vanished without a trace that very night. The day that followed remained unforgettable, marked by the intense terror and heartbreak emanating from Sarah's distraught parents and the renewed sense of dread enveloping the entire community with another child gone missing. I found myself in a state of shock, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the events unfolding. Throughout that day, I scoured the tracks and trains on my bike, searching desperately for any sign of her, but to no avail. Instead, all I encountered was the haunting echo of her words from the night before as I gazed down those deserted tracks. A sense of guilt crept into me, feeling partly responsible for not fully listening to what she was trying to convey. Well, later that same night, I was jolted awake from a deep sleep by the sudden blare of a horn. Possibly the very same one that Sarah had mentioned. Rising from my bed, I made my way to the window overlooking our backyard and the abandoned tracks beyond. Peering outside, I observed smoke billowing in the far distance, signaling the approach of a train headed in our direction. As the horn persisted, the dense fog and smoke gradually enveloped the surroundings, creating an unsettling and ghostly atmosphere. Suddenly, a faint voice echoed my name from behind. Gabriel. I spun around swiftly, only to find emptiness greeting me. I stood petrified. The voice resembled Sarah's, which left me with an unsettling feeling and sensation I was being watched. I called out to her, but all that replied was the relentless sound of that train horn approaching closer. Acting on instinct, I shouted frantically and sprinted as fast as I could to my parents' room. But upon bursting in, I was met with a stark emptiness. No bed, no dressers, nothing remained. The windows began to glow with an eerie light, accompanied by the dense smoke encircling the surroundings. With the train drawing nearer, the lights intensified, blinding me until I could no longer discern anything amidst the choking clouds that engulfed me, leaving me coughing uncontrollably. Moments passed, and as the mist lifted and the bright lights dimmed, a haunting chorus of children's cries filled the air, accompanied by the unmistakable odor of burnt coal. Before I knew it, I was standing within the confines of a train, sensing the vibration beneath my feet as the cabin became more visible. I must be trapped in some sort of nightmare, I thought, though its realism left me uncertain. The cries persisted, accompanied by the unmistakable terror etched on their faces, arms extending from the confines of their cages. My heart raced uncontrollably as I surveyed the room filled with imprisoned and restrained children. The clinking of chains resonated with each of their movements. I wondered if Sarah was here. I called out to her, but impossible to discern anything from the hellish ambience enshrouding me. Then, I saw a face I recognized from the missing children posters. Anna, a girl who had gone missing in '79, about 7 years back or so. Her face, though, expressionless, as if her soul was completely drained from her. In an instant, a ghostly shriek reverberated through the train carriage, making my heart skip a beat. The wails of the children around me escalated as the train began to screech to a halt. I instinctively covered my ears, trying to block out the intensifying noise. Amidst the chaos, Anna's voice barely reached me, repeating, "You can't escape." She was just saying it over and over while growing louder, with the other children now echoing the same words. My eyes brimmed with tears, and my panic and fear grew. I just wanted to leave this nightmare. The room started growing intensely hotter, the odor of the coal becoming more overpowering, until finally, the screeching of the brakes stopped as the train came to a halt. A door slid open, unveiling the familiar sight of my backyard and the distant silhouette of my house. Despite the surreal nature, I acted impulsively, jumping out and sprinting towards home with all of my might. Every step felt like a blur of motion, yet I couldn't resist stealing a glance over my shoulder, watching the unsettling train fade into the distance, with its horn fading as it grew farther. Upon reaching my house and hastily entering, I found both my parents standing motionless, their eyes fixed on me with a creepy grin. "Mom? Dad?" I questioned as I approached them. Their smiles stretched wider, more malevolent, and, in unison, they uttered, "It's not your time yet, Gabrielle." Then, in an instant, I found myself rising from my bed, jolting awake. Sweat soaked my body, my heart racing. It took me a while to realize it was all just a dream. However, in the next moment, I heard the distant sound of that train horn, serving as a haunting reminder of the very real experience I had just encountered. It was in October of 1983 when Michael Jackson's hit single Thriller, arcade games, and women's shoulder pads defined the cultural landscape, coinciding with my senior year in high school. Dan, my then boyfriend, cherished his 1970s Chevrolet Chevelle he named Darlene, passed down from his father who tragically drowned 2 months back. He often spoke of the car as a link to his dad, even believing his father communicated with him through it. While I tried to be supportive knowing losing a dad must be tough, I couldn't help but feel pretty creeped out by it. Late one Thursday, Dan rolled into our driveway with Darlene. The sound of Early's rock filled the air as he parked, much to my dad's annoyance, who was already grumbling about not wanting me to hang out with boys. But I tossed on my jacket and made my way out. While we were driving around the neighborhoods, checking out the spooky Halloween displays and trying to choose a spot to fool around, Dan kept rambling about the discussions he had with his dad while driving around the night before, effectively squashing any romance in the air. As we made our way to the overlook above our town, a usual hangout spot for us, Dan's driving became increasingly aggressive. He peeled out at every stop sign and slammed on the brakes abruptly at the next, despite my repeated pleas for him to stop and insistence that it wasn't funny. But his eyes remained fixed ahead, accompanied by a chilling grin. While we zoomed down the street, I caught sight of an elderly man crossing ahead of us. "Dan, stop!" I screamed, breaking his trance-like state. He jammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding the man. The old man slowly turned his drunken gaze towards us, but when our eyes met, his widened in alarm. "Get out," he shouted. "Get out of that car, or you'll be doomed." His urgency sent shivers down my spine as my anxiety spiked. Dan yelled at the man to move while honking the horn impatiently. "Crazy drunk," Dan muttered as the man reluctantly shifted just enough for us to speed away, Dan shouting at him as we peeled out. I kept hitting Dan's arm, expressing my frustration at his gross behavior, but he simply cranked up the already blaring rock music and drove on towards our destination. I sat beside him, seething with anger, waiting for some sort of apology or acknowledgement of his actions. We arrived at the ledge overlooking the town and parked, with Dan finally lowering the volume of the music. He glanced at me, attempting to sweet-talk me, but I remained quiet. It wasn't just about tonight. His behavior had been unsettling and strange for the past few days. I stepped outside to take in some fresh air. The mid-autumn breeze carried a slight chill, but the tranquil view of the town below never failed to soothe me. Dan later joined me, standing shoulder to shoulder, and offered a far more heartfelt apology. Although part of me wanted to hold on to my anger, I also just wanted to make the most of the night. Dan persisted in discussing his father and Darlene, prompting me to express my discomfort with him referring to his car as a woman. I asserted that the only woman that he should be admiring is me. I proposed that if he agreed to this, I would let him off the hook for the night, to which he nodded in agreement. As we leaned against the car, arms wrapped around each other, looking at the stars and the town below, we observed the headlights flickering and the radio emitting a soft buzzing noise, prompting Dan to check for any issues. As Dan stepped into the car, the buzzing noise grew louder. Worried, I joined him inside to help. As soon as I settled into the seat, the car door abruptly slammed shut behind me, making my heart skip a beat. Peering outside, I scanned the surroundings but found no explanation for the sudden movement. Despite our efforts to adjust the radio settings, there was no response. The buzzing just continued on. Suddenly, the car shifted into drive by itself, causing me to frantically tell Dan that this wasn't funny. He nervously tried to shift it back into park, but the car slowly began creeping towards the cliff edge. Instinctively, I reached for the door handle, but recoiled as I felt a searing heat burning my hand. To my horror, I watched as the door locked itself. Dan's shouts grew more frantic as the car edged closer to the cliff's edge. Ignoring the pain, I gritted my teeth and unlocked the door, swiftly flipping the burning handle and kicking the door open, urgently leaping out. Collapsing onto the chilly, grimy ground, I turned over just in time to witness the car plunging over the ledge, with Dan's screams echoing inside, gradually fading as the vehicle tumbled down the hillside, finally coming to a halt after striking a large rock below. I stood up and peered down the cliff, straining my eyes to see through the darkness. After a moment of scanning, I could barely make out the wreckage, but there was Darlene below, lying in complete ruin. Dan, I thought, most likely dead. I was in complete shock. And following this, my memory became hazy, possibly due to a traumatic response. Later, I was discovered walking along the roadside and taken to the hospital, where my memory gradually returned. Dan's mangled body was recovered from the cliff, but no trace of the car. Darlene, however, is out there. I've seen her a couple times since. And ironically, like the crazy old man from the night of Dan's death, I found myself warning those driving it that it's cursed, knowing she's thirsty for more blood. My name is Crystal. I was 18 years old and recently accepted to Union College in New York. The college is located in Schenectady, which is just outside New York's capital, Albany. I was excited about starting my first year of college and stepping out on my own, but also nervous because I was born and raised in a small Midwestern town. I was really close with my family, which included 2 younger siblings, who, I felt, saw me as a role model being as I was the eldest. After attending college visits, having gone through orientation, and moving into my dorm, I honestly just wanted to get started with classes and continue what was familiar in my young adult life, studying. Because this was my first year on campus, I stayed in the fresh room dorms. I had a room to myself, which I loved, but shared a common area, kitchen, and bathrooms. I had 3 housemates, each also having their own rooms. I remember feeling so great the first night I finally got to sleep in my room. A few days passed, and the semester classes had officially started. Right away, I was getting hit with assignments. I was arranging the desk in my room and organizing all the folders and materials I needed for class now that I had a more firm grasp on what to expect the next coming months. That night, the first night after classes had started, I remember waking up from a horrific nightmare. There's no way I can explain with words how to describe it, but what I can say is I was sweating upon waking up. The next day, I again had the first day of many of my classes. I was grabbing lunch in the dining hall with one of my housemates, Elijah. He had a similar major and shared 2 classes. We were chatting about our first impressions. As he was talking, while him being in front of me, I had looked just past his shoulder for a moment. I saw a strange-looking reflection in a window 10 feet away. It looked to be a girl standing there in what I can best explain, in the window. It wasn't a reflection, nor was it outside, as we were on the 2nd floor. "Hey, are you okay, Crystal?" Elijah asked. Refocusing my attention back to him, I apologized and assured Elijah, "Yeah, I'm okay. Just distracted, I guess, with all the changes." He nodded understandingly, offering a supportive smile. Briefly glancing back at the window, I noticed the figure was no longer there. Later that night, after hanging out in the common area with my housemates for a bit, I felt ready again to tackle hours of studying. So I went back to my room and did just that. Engrossed in my studying and tuned into the music, I noticed a subtle shift in the corner of my eye by the window. I peered over. I saw something fade from the window. Immediately, my mind revisited what I had witnessed in the dining hall earlier. I took a deep breath and continued on with my studies. In the course of that night, I was awakened once more, but this time, not by a nightmare, at least as far as I can recall. Rather, it was the sound of a knock. I looked around in the darkness, but didn't see nor hear anything. Shortly after, it came back, this time a series of knocks. The sound seemed to originate from the desk. Getting to my feet, I switched on the light and scanned the room. Nothing. I strained to hear the noise again, but there was only silence. Opening my bedroom door, I took a quick look into the common area. It was dark, and with everyone sleeping in their respective rooms. A sense of dread crawled over me, as if something ominous lurked over my shoulders. Despite the eerie feeling, I did my best to dismiss it and drift back into slumber. The next day unfolded quite normally, and I began to feel somewhat better after being thoroughly creeped out from the night before. I had arranged to meet up with Elijah for a meal before calling it a night. We headed to one of the many campus food halls, and while everything appeared normal, the memory of the odd incidents from the days prior still lingered in the back of my mind. Upon returning to my dorm room, a feeling of hesitation crept in. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself everything was fine. I just had to do some last-minute studying before bedtime. I retrieved my books from my bag, placed them on the desk, and got down to work. The next thing I recall was realizing that 30 minutes had passed, and I found myself staring blankly at an open book, as if I had just awakened. It felt peculiar, and I wanted to attribute it to sheer exhaustion. I should really go to bed, I thought to myself. As I rose from my seat, a sudden scratching sound caught my attention. I turned to look. It seemed to be coming from that window in the room. I stood frozen, my gaze fixed on that window as the scratching sound persisted. Then, to my astonishment, a barrage of loud knocks echoed on my desk. I looked down. Nothing other than my book still laying open. The scratching noise from the window vanished, and a heavy silence settled in the room. I stood there, immobilized, trying to process the strange events. My heart pounded wildly, and breathing became a struggle. Overwhelmed, I moved towards the door, opened it, stepped out of my room, and made my way to my housemate Sarah's room. As she opened the door, I was in tears. She welcomed me into her room, and I recounted the strange happenings with her. She appeared puzzled, grappled with the effort to understand my narrative. Consoling me, she proceeded to my room for a closer look. Despite her thorough search, she couldn't identify anything out of the ordinary. I informed her that I intended to sleep on the couch in the common area. She understood, agreeing that it would be the best option for the night. Gathering pillows and a blanket from my room, I settled in for the rest of the night just outside with my room door closed. Surprisingly, Sarah decided to join me. In the 20 or so minutes before drifting to sleep, I couldn't shake the profound and disturbing sense of a haunting presence. Each passing day seemed to bring a growing struggle, making it increasingly challenging to come to terms with reality. The next morning wasn't any less unnerving. From the moment I woke up, I felt a sense of unease. I was tired and exhausted, but I had to continue with morning classes. I spent less than a minute in my dorm room before leaving, swiftly gathering my books. Class for the day had begun and the professor started his lecture. Everyone, including myself, were taking notes. As the lecture continued, I heard the girl beside me asking something. I turned to look and respond, but she appeared to be focused on taking notes. She glanced over at me briefly and then returned her attention back to the professor. As I faced forward, I caught sight of a wispy, dark figure in the corner of the room. Near immediately, I started hearing strange voices around me. Heart racing, I closed my eyes in hopes it would go away. But when opening, the figure was still there. No one else seems to see it. I didn't want to wait around. As quietly as I could, I collected my belongings and swiftly left class. Nearly crying, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my parents. This was the first time I had called them with such a concern. My dad answered. His voice then brought me to crying, right there in the middle of the hall. Luckily, everyone was in class at this time. As clearly as I could, I explained I was scared and needed to leave. Confused, he asked me to slow down, trying to grasp with the situation. I told him I was being stalked and followed and I didn't feel safe. After calming down and speaking with my family, we decided to book my flight out that night. The plan was to address the situation with the college administration department at a later time. I waited outside Elijah's class for him to finish. I needed someone to assist me while I grabbed some important items from my dorm room. While making our way back to our residence, I explained to him that I was going back home for a little while. Though as understanding as he was shocked about how abrupt it was. I didn't go into detail of what I was experiencing with Elijah or my other housemates. I didn't want others to think I was going insane. I just had explained I wasn't feeling well. Upon arriving at the residence hall, I looked up at my room window. Nothing was there, but I wasn't convinced something wasn't waiting. Elijah opened the door and entered our main common area. I followed. There was an intense feeling of despair I couldn't shake off. When walking to my dorm room, I felt a growing, disturbing presence. I listened to see if I could hear something on the other side of the door, but it was silent. I put my hand on the doorknob and opened the door. I slowly creaked the door open while gazing into the opening room. To my horror, as I looked towards the desk, there was a black, wispy yet human-like figure sitting there. It glanced over at me while holding a pencil and writing something on the desk. Shocked, I fell back and tripped over a small end table we had in the common area. Elijah quickly came to my aid as I hit the floor and asked what happened. "Someone's in there," I said. Elijah went over, opened the rest of the door, stepped inside, and looked around. But he didn't notice anything odd. Slowly but hesitantly, I entered my room. Elijah's presence inside the room greatly helped me feel at ease. I had my gaze down and focused on what was important. I began hearing sounds of writing on the desk where the figure was. I kept my head tilted to not see what was there. Elijah and I exited the room. Elijah closed the door behind him upon my request. Just before the door had closed, I heard some final knocks on the desk. Hastily, I made my way out of the building. Just as we stepped outside, I hugged and thanked Elijah. I apologized for how odd I'd been acting. He said not to worry about it and to only get better. He had to go to his next class, and I couldn't bother asking for more. Following that, I headed my way to a restaurant off campus to eat, wait for the taxi my father had scheduled, and get some distance from that dark, ghostly apparition. I do feel fortunate to have such a great dad, but I can't help but feel I had let him down at that moment. The way to and the time at the restaurant went without any surprises to my relief, and after having eaten some food and letting my nerves calm down a bit, I was feeling better. I called my parents to update them of what's going on just as the taxi pulled in front of the restaurant. I then took off to the airport and flew back home to rejoin my family. The haunting presence that had engulfed me seemed to fade as I grew nearer home. The travel back was relaxing, and I was able to catch some good sleep on the plane. My family welcomed me, and I was surprised on how welcoming and excited they were to see me. Only over a week had passed, and they missed me to death. I teared up as I embraced them. Quite some time has passed since that autumn. I did end up re-enrolling and completing a graduate course at another university, all thanks to my family's amazing support. I sensed that my achievements as an adult also brought them a sense of pride. However, days don't pass without their challenges. While I cope much better with the memory, I can't help but avoid looking into dark spaces, fearing I might see her or something I would rather not encounter. At times, I feel I hear her whisper to me, but I disregard it as my imagination. The lingering questions I'm still left with today are, why did this happen to me? Why weren't others affected by it? Did it continue to haunt the next person going into that room, or does it still linger in that room this day, sitting at that desk, waiting for the next student to torment?